Good evening and welcome to the second interview in ACS's Industry Insights Leaders series. This series features Australian tech professionals who will share their expertise on how technology and innovation transforms, influences and shapes our wider society. My name is Daniel Rayhana, Chief Operations Officer at ACS, and I'll be your host this evening. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Tonight our guest is Stevan, Premutico, founder of Me and You and Dimmi, which he sold to TripAdvisor in 2015 for 8 figures. Welcome, Stevan.
Hello, guys.
Stevan is an entrepreneur, a passionate tech investor, and sits on the board of a few disruptive Aussie startups, including Spare, Workspace, and Found. Stevan's accolades include taking Dimmi from a napkin to a blue chip exit in 2015, being part of Deloitte's Tech Fast 50 in Australia in 2014, BRW Top 100 in 2014, and Hill Best 30 Under 30 2010. We're grateful that Stevan is joining us today to share his experience and expertise with ACS members. Welcome again. Great to see you.
Daniel, hello, mate. It feels like the anthill under 30 was a long time ago.
This evening we'll be taking questions from our audience through the chat function, which Stevan will endeavour to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end of this session. So we'll get straight into it now, and please post those questions. Before you founded Dimmi, Stevan, you had a comfortable career in the hotel management industry. What made you decide to give up that and to become a tech entrepreneur?
Mate, I think it's hard, hey, because there's no script for our lives, so we tend to write it ourselves. You're right, I was regional director of marketing for Hilton Hotels, responsible for 30 hotels across London, so I had a great job, great income, living in a penthouse in London, in Chelsea. The story goes that I walked into my boss, a guy named Mike Ashton, and I was trying to convince Mike of an idea that I believed in. And he turned around to me and he said, Steve, you've got to appreciate that Hilton is like a Titanic and things take time. And that night I went home and I just couldn't get that through my head. What do you mean things take time? Life's short, go hard, go fast. Seize the moment was my, just approach to life. And the next day I was on a flight from London to Madrid where I had my performance review. And I'll never forget this, but on that flight, rather than writing a letter to justify my pay rise, I wrote a different letter. I wrote my resignation. And then I walked into Cynthia, who I was doing my performance review with, and I said, Cynthia, I've got to go. And the crazy thing is, at that time, I had nowhere to go. I didn't have a job. I didn't even have an idea, but I just knew that I had something, perhaps like all the guys in the audience today, I had something that was in my gut that I had to do. I never wanted to be the 84-year-old man, Daniel, who looked back at his life and said, I wish I did, or I could have. So I did. I handed in that letter. And then spent the next year of my life trying to work out what the idea was going to be.
Right, thank you. And so you've taken that year off, you found your idea, and like you, there'll be many Australian startups out there right now that are looking to do the same, looking to scale and commercialise their businesses in the aftermath of COVID-19 and the recovery. You've got a pretty similar story in similar ways, where you founded your startup during the GFC. How did you navigate the risks of that economic environment to ensure your startup was on track to scale and commercialise?
Yeah, wow, good question. So I truly believe that moments like this typically are the basis for many of the great ideas on the planet. And if you think sort of back to history, some of the greatest inventions and some of the great brains of our time were born out of sort of periods of great adversity. Whether that be sort of the Depression, the GFC, and not for any moment am I comparing Dimmi to any of that, but Disney, Google, Uber, IBM, Ford Motor Cars, were born out of periods of great adversity. So what I do think is that although it's a tough time for everyone, there's a whole lot of people out there who were following a corporate path, who probably had something deep inside their gut, and now they're kind of finding themselves having lots more time on their hands. So I actually believe that this is an amazing time to force entrepreneurs to follow their dreams, and give them the time and space to do that. So, I think no matter how difficult the time is, capital and opportunity will always be there for cracking ideas. So I definitely think that, I accept that it's hard, but people will back great ideas. And, now more than ever is a time where people are looking for ideas to solve problems. Dimmi was born on the back of GFC, and it was hard to raise the capital, but once we got the capital, the industry needed Dimmi more than ever before. So yes, so I wouldn't give up because it's a tough time. In fact, I think it's an amazing time for entrepreneurs across the planet.
Thanks, Stevan. We'll come back to the capital question in a second, but what advice would you offer to early stage founders on how to build their core foundations to make sure that they're positioned well to come out of this and for future investment?
But I think the absolute core to any founder or startup person is you've just got to be thick-skinned and resilient, because we're going to get rejected and knocked back, so many times. So we've got to be resilient and we've got to be thick-skinned. So I would absolutely accept that the world has changed. And, for some, that may mean that the idea that we had before is not the right idea for the other side. For others, it may mean that now is just the perfect opportunity to accelerate the idea. But I think, I always come back to a couple of key tenets, and that is that, it's difficult out there in the market right now. Cash is king. So if you've got cash, in startups, we don't have a lot of cash. But if you've got a bit of cash, preserve it as best you can, spend it very wisely, and just accept that, whatever this period is, it's gonna be harder and longer than most of us expect. So just make sure you've got enough cash to kind of ride out the downturn that we're going through.
Thank you. And Sim, just quickly, your journey at the moment with me and you, you've decided not to pivot. Any particular reason for that one?
Mate, it's definitely been one of the toughest decisions, of my, short career. But, I think so me and you's it's a really simple business that, we set out to change the way Australians order and pay in cafes, restaurants, and pubs. So, I'm a food tech guy, so I'm back in an industry I'm very deeply passionate about. So when COVID hit, one of the industries that was destroyed was our sector. So every hospitality venue across the planet was shut down. So what that meant was that all of our partners pivoted into pick up and takeaway. It was a natural place for us to go. And in fact, most of the the big names in this country kind of called upon us and said, can we do pick up and takeaway for them? It was a evolution of our product. But to be honest, Daniel, it felt like we almost had this social and moral obligation to help the industry when the doors opened again. Mm-hmm. So instead of pivoting into pick up and takeaway, which we think is short-lived and kind of a desperate sort of attempt to make some money out of a few weeks or a few months, as a leadership team, we sat down and sort of nutted it out. And I think where we landed was the industry has changed. Customers' expectations have transformed. The single best thing that we can do to serve this industry is make sure that we're ready for when the doors open again. So when our pubs open the doors, that menu is ready to deliver a contactless experience that is better than anything they've seen before. So we bunkered down, we re-engineered, so refocused the entire team, and that was around creating a shining light of a product that could help when the doors opened again. So it was a brave call. Only time will tell if it was the right call.
And how big's the team here, Stevan?
So we're 25 strong across Australia, and that consists of a bunch of engineers, sales, account management, and sort of customer service.
Thank you. Great to have your engineering team on shore. Take us back to Dimmi, and we'll go back to that capital question. You were living over in the UK at the time. You just quit your job, taken a 12-month sabbatical. Tell us about your capital raise. It's unusual to see people coming back to Australia. We tend to see a lot of startups going over to the US or to the UK to raise their first funds. Can you take us through your story?
Yeah, so just to perhaps give you a bit more color. I was a 28-year-old Aussie kid living in London, right? So at this point in time, I'd quit my job, and I was sketching ideas on the back of a napkin to try and work out what I was going to do for the rest of the next couple of years of my life. I ran out of money, and I didn't. As startups, we don't think about survival. We don't think about how am I going to survive for the next 3 months or 6 months. So I ran out of money. I had nowhere to live. So I was fortunate that a friend of mine had an attic that he allowed me to live in Maida Vale in London. And for the next year of my life, I would work 20-hour days, 6 days a week, just sketching out and sort of trying to create this idea that inevitably became Dimmi. And at some point on that journey, I had enough of a vision in my head that I effectively turned into a bunch of PowerPoint slides and a financial model, and I hit the streets, and I would go from high net wealth individual to VC to Dragon's Den to anything, Gordon Ramsay, Jamie Oliver, anybody who I thought was right, I was desperately trying to knock on their door to raise some money. And the problem that I had was I was an unproven founder. I was trying to raise money in the GFC, which was tough. So it still gives me shivers thinking about this, but I still have those 34 PowerPoint decks, and I would go to a pitch, and I would pitch, and I'd be knocked down and destroyed. And after that meeting, I would go and refine my pitch deck. So I've got 34 iterations of this pitch deck, but by the end, it became a very good deck. The problem was, my body wasn't keeping up so well. So after all of this sort of the batter and the bruise and the kicks and the uppercuts that you get a bit destroyed. And one morning when I woke on my way to Starbucks for a coffee, I fainted. And I think it was at that point when I said, shit, I've got to wake up to myself. I'm not looking after myself. I'm working crazy hours. I've got to stop. So I jumped on a plane. I came back to Australia, and I gave myself 4 weeks. And I said, this is it. I've got to go and find the money, or I've got to do what everyone else was telling me to do, and that is to just go and get a job. Yeah. And I hated the naysayers, right? I didn't want to listen to those guys, and I hated everything that they stood for. But unless I could get the capital, I had to concede and I had to listen to them. And this is how it happened, right? I caught up with a friend, and Tamara introduced me to one of her friends, who introduced me to their parent, to their father, a guy named Philip. I caught up with him for a coffee at the Western Hotel in Sydney. And, in that meeting, he gave me $200,000 to get Dimmi off the ground. So that was pitch number 35. And I think what I realized was in all of that, I found somebody who believed in me. Forget the deck, forget everything else. He saw something in me. And that was perhaps something that nobody else saw, but he gave me a crack. And he gave me the opportunity to get Dimmi off the ground. And that was a moment that changed my life and created Dimmi.
Thank you. So 34 knockbacks. I've got to ask another question on that. What was the most brutal piece of feedback you got from an investor, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, wow.
Or constructive, Stevan.
No. That's a great question. Daniel, I think one of the problems that we have as founders is we're exceptionally passionate about solving a problem. So quite often, I'd be meeting somebody for the first time, and I would rock up to this meeting, and naturally you're nervous and you're shitting yourself, and you'd walk into this chat, and that in this next hour of your life, or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, this is an opportunity that could change your life. And I think what happens, because there's all this build up and this sort of nerves, you go in and you go straight for the deck, and you go bang, 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 and you forget arguably the most important bit, and that is to build a rapport and to build a chemistry and to get this person to see you and to believe in you. So I think that the problem is critical, but before any of that, an investor's going to back you. So make sure we're presenting the opportunity and giving the forum the opportunity for there to be a connection, before you go into your PowerPoint slides and your deck.
Thank you. So we'll have a number of members and viewers tonight that.
Sorry, Daniel. Can I think the other, brutal but honest bit of feedback that I got was, I've been very lucky to have a guy named Cliff Rosenberg, who was the managing director of LinkedIn and, sort of now on the board of Afterpay, as a sort of investor and a mentor for me, along the ride. First at Dimmi and now at Me and You. And I'll never forget that we'd just been to, and this is kind of, probably year 2 or year 3, at Fairfax, at Dimmi. And we just come back from a meeting with Fairfax where they wanted to invest in the business. And, there I am as 100% shareholder and founder and owner. And, we think, it's crazy. I'm not going to allow, somebody else to take part of, this thing that I've created. And as we're getting out of this taxi on George Street, Cliff said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Steve, it's better to have a smaller part of something huge than it is to have a bigger part of something small. So I think that was, a bit of advice that has sort of become pretty formative on my journey when I think about capital raising and investment.
Thank you. So look, we're going to have a number of members and viewers tonight that may not necessarily be highly technical. Some of our next sort of emerging entrepreneurs, but they may have a great idea. How did you make sure, and what advice would you give to people in similar sort of circumstances that when they do get their idea off the ground, the necessary checks and balances are in place to make sure that your vision comes to life?
Daniel, I think this is a bit of a myth, mate. Like, I think that there's this perception out there that you can only ever become a tech entrepreneur if you're a coder, and if you're an engineer, and if you know tech. Yep. I come at it from a different perspective, not necessarily the right perspective, but a different one. Yep. And that is that I think as founders, and I'm somebody who just obsesses over solving a problem. So at Me and You, I find that insane and crazy that I can get an Uber to my house faster than I can order a beer in a pub. So we set out to change that. So, I'm the problem solver. It's my job to kind of set a vision and a mission and recruit the best talent on the planet to help me on that ride. But I wouldn't know how to write a piece of code. It's not my job. But it's absolutely critical that you have the right checks and balances, and you have the right people who are exceptional at that. So the approach that I take to that is typically for a startup, I absolutely believe in using an agency or outsourcing the first part of the build. So typically, I've done this in both of my startups. I will find an agency who I believe in, who is local, because I'm a perfectionist. So I need them here so I can touch and feel and see them. And I will engage the agency. And their job is to build the foundations of a MVP product for me to take to market. Now, I can't do that on my own, so I'm lucky enough that I've found, again, sort of through, the journey of life, a industry veteran, a guy named John Scott, who has been through, every iteration of sort of tech in this country, and is one of the greatest sort of tech people that I know. So I brought him out of retirement, and he sort of came on the Dimmi ride, and came and helped me again, sort of with me and you. And he's my advisor that helps me kind of build the business from 0 to 1 from a tech perspective. So he helps me understand where I need to focus the efforts of the agency to make sure that this thing's built for the future. So I think that's the first bit. So I'll build an exceptional product, exceptional MVP. I'll use a advisor to kind of help me build the MVP. At some point along that ride, the use of an agency is no longer sustainable or affordable, so you bring it in-house. Now, this is a critical bit, and you then need to find a CPO or an exceptional leader to then go and recruit, an exceptional sort of dev, engineer, sort of product team. So, I've been very fortunate that I found, a really special rock star, world-class individual in Kishan, who's ex-HelloFresh, who came, who I met early in the Dimmi ride, in the Me and You ride, to come and sort of lead that part of the business for me. So I'm focused on the vision, the mission, kind of building the brand, and the product is with Kishan to make that a best of breed sort of global platform. So I use an agency. At some point, once we've got MVP, I bring it in-house, and then we kind of scale and build it using sort of best, world-class sort of engineers, and a world-class CPO.
Thanks very much. Stevan, every year ACS releases ACS's Australian Digital Pulse, and last year a report showed that 97% of Australian tech startups fail to scale and commercialise from the early stage. Given this is your sort of second time on the roundabout now, what do you think set you apart from your peers that haven't managed to be successful yet, and what advice would you give them to navigating that early stage?
Yeah. It's hard. I'd say there's probably, maybe 3 things that I think are really critical to going from sort of startup to scale up. So I think the first thing is that, having a good idea is important. I truly think it's about 1% of the success criteria. I think absolutely the most important part is who are you surrounding yourself with, and do you have the right team to execute? Because we've all seen it. Unless we've all seen great ideas with the wrong people turn into nothing, but average ideas with exceptional people turn into global rock stars. So I think number 1 is be intuitive enough to know that where you're good and where you're not, and surround yourself with an exceptional team, number one. Number two is get the right level of the right investors and the right board of directors around you. Because I think what happens is, as founders, we go so deep, and we're constantly putting out fires, and we're constantly in survival mode, and we're constantly stressing about operational issues and people issues and shit. And once a month, the opportunity to sit in a boardroom with people who are thinking a bit more strategic, have been there and done it with other businesses, is really critical. So the ability to kind of do that and regroup once a month. I've been so lucky and so grateful that through my respective boards, I've been able to get Will Easton, who's the boss of Facebook, and Cliff, who I mentioned earlier, and some of the sort of top sort of tech and hospo people on this planet, in this country, on the ride. So I think that's a really important sort of second bit. And the third bit may sound a bit counterintuitive, but we've got to be obsessive over the idea, but not so obsessed that we forget to listen. So, this is, I think, a common fault of founders, is that we have an idea that's in our head and we're so stubborn and so resilient. If the market's not accepting it, or if the market has evolved, we still go down that path. And I think we've got to make sure that we're so connected and so obsessed with the customer and the insights and the feedback and the data that's coming from them, that you can evolve the product as you need to. So be resilient, but be willing to truly listen and evolve as we need to create the perfect product market fit for the business. So I think they're the three key bits that I'd say kind of make part of the difference between a startup that fails and a startup that kind of succeeds through to future iterations.
Thank you. Steven, last week I had the opportunity to interview Sam Mostyn, who sits on a number of different boards, and she said similar types of things, that startups and any businesses that were solving customer problems were those that were going to be able to carve out niche parts of their respective markets. Similarly, she also spoke to owning space within a market and sort of knowing what that would be. Can you give us sort of your journey and some of the lessons you learnt through Dimmi and even me and you on how to find that niche to be able to not cannibalise maybe existing markets, but also to stave off international competitors?
Yeah, well, the international competitor one is fascinating for me, and I think would be fascinating for lots of your audience. I think what you've got to know where you've got a competitive edge. You've got to know where you've got a perfect product market fit. And I would say you don't stop until you find that. And until you've got the product market fit, you haven't truly got something that's going to scale and grow. And, when we're thinking about getting into different markets and different segments, as tempting as it is, if you don't have an edge, if you're not the absolute best, then I think we've got to seriously question whether that's the right market for us to invest limited resources and limited capital. The international competitive one is fascinating for me because, if I think about, the Dimmi ride, which is a 10-year ride, not a year goes by that you don't get, some big bully coming from an international market saying, mate, we're about to smash you. So we want to buy you, or we want to partner with you, or we're going to smash you. Like, that's typically the approach that they take. And the big companies from Europe and America and the like, and typically they're right because they've got lots of money. They're typically more advanced than you. And I think the experience that I had at Dimmi was fascinating because we were kind of maybe 6 or 7 years into our ride, and we got approached by a company called OpenTable, who's kind of the big sort of dominant $2.6 billion gorilla in the reservation space. And they reached out. They were looking to potentially buy, partner, invest in us, and we'd created a deck. We sent it off to their entire M&A team, and the next day we were due to pitch to their entire senior executive team. The day before this happened, they poached my director of sales. And I'll never forget this moment because it sends shivers through your bones. And I'm in an open plan office in Chippendale, and I'm fuming. So I walk out of the office and I go and sit in the gutter in Chippendale, and you're destroyed. And I call Matt Roberts, who's the CEO of OpenTable, and I say, Matt, I'm not sure if you know what's just happened, but you've just poached my director of sales. And he will say something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Steve, I'm not willing to have a conversation about bracket person. We're coming into the market and we're going to do this with you or without you. So they're attempting to force us into a sale. So that was the last time I ever spoke to them. We hung up the phone. I went back inside to the team and I said, guys, this is it. It's game on. And for the next 2 years, it became an epic battle between sort of, the little Aussie startup, of Dimmi versus the international Goliath of OpenTable. But I think here's an interesting point. History will say that they didn't touch us. History will say they threw everything at us. And I think for me, as I look at that, the two companies were fighting for a different thing. So we were fighting because the team of Dimmi was so passionate and so committed to making the industry better, and they were fighting for sales and targets and budgets and numbers sat in a spreadsheet. And they threw everything at it, at us, but they never took one of our customers. And I think it's testament to if you've got a very strong why, if you and a team are committed and truly believe in what you're doing, you don't need to be worried about competitors. Just continue to be obsessed about who you are, what you're doing, and just swim in your lane. And I think that's an interesting case about sort of local or international competitors.
Thank you. Look, one of the mantras of the startup world is to fail fast and pivot quickly. How have you been able to strike the balance between working fast and I suppose accuracy, or the product may not necessarily have to be perfect to get it out to market and to be off to the races?
Yeah, this is definitely one that my heart and my brain conflict with all the time, right? Because I'm a perfectionist. So in my heart, I always want to wait until things are perfect, but I absolutely know we're not going to know until we put it in the hands of customers. And I think Bezos has a famous saying of, if you're waiting for more than 70% of the data, your competitors are moving so much faster than you. So, I think, in the world that we're living today, customers are the only true indicator of what's right and what's not. And you've got to use some data, you've got to use a lot of intuition, you've got to use the smarts of the people around you, and just get stuff to customers as quickly as you can. Learn from it, use data to pivot and evolve, and just keep evolving and evolving and evolving. But I think I truly believe that until you put it in the hands of customers, we truly don't know if they're going to like or love something that we're giving to them.
Thanks, Stevan. You sold your startup. You're able to make a great exit. As a founder, how important is it to know the right time to pass the baton on to the next person or organisation? And what were some of your key considerations?
Yeah, a great exit. Like it's funny. Like even to this day, I don't even know. Like I keep the monetary value of what I sold Dimmi for. Like it didn't matter to me at the time. And it didn't matter now. I think as founders, it's not the reason why we get into startups. It's not the reason why we exit at some point. Mm-hmm. there was a very significant moment in my journey where, we'd been approached by three international players all at the same time. So one from Japan, one from America, and one from Europe. And I took those offers and approaches to my board, and the board said something that you wouldn't expect a board to say. They said, "Steve, how do you feel?" And that's a very unboard-like question. But I was 10 years into the ride, and the subtext of the question is, Steve, can you go another 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And as somebody, I give my life everything I've got. If it's my house, my partner, my business, I go all in. I think that might be the Italian in me. But so I think, having given Dimmi everything I had for 10 years, it got to a point where I was exhausted. I was battered, bruised, and, inside your soul, it's difficult to continue to be creative and inspiring and to think about the next game-changing idea. So that was why I chose to sell Dimmi, because, I think in part, I didn't have the energy to go another 5 years. And I think the second part of that is great founders, and I truly believe this, great founders know what they're great at and what they're not. And I absolutely know that I'm a founder and I'm not a CEO. And there's a significant difference between the two ways that those two people think. So I know that I love solving problems. I love creating something. I'm like a 0 to 3 years guy. I'm not the year 5 to year 10 sort of operational person. That's not me. So a great founder is great because I know when they're founding something and when it's time to pass it on to a CEO. Mm-hmm. So I think those two bits combined were the driver behind me saying, you know what, it's time for me to go. And I was fortunate that I found somebody in TripAdvisor who, I truly believed was, a better brand to make Dimmi, to walk Dimmi down the aisle and look after my baby. So it's funny, I've noticed this. I interchange Dimmi and me and you quite a bit by accident, but I think it's perhaps testament to how these two things remain part of your whole heart and soul for a long time.
Thanks for your candor. What have you learned from the experience going through the journey of founding your first startup that you're now applying to your new venture in Me and You? So it sounds like there's a lot. It sounds like people making sure the right people are around you. But even just, if you could, just touch on, we spoke before we started just about the emotional roller coaster that a founder goes on. If you could touch on that as well, that would be fantastic.
Then when I the last day of my Dimmi ride, I was doing an interview with the Australian with a great journalist named Damon Kitney, and the very last thing that he quoted me as saying was, I would never ever do this startup thing again. And I think it's true, right? Like, we give it everything we've got, and it's hard to think that you could do number 2 or number 3 because, we just get so exhausted. So, if I think back to absolutely one of the key learnings for me, and I didn't get this right at Dimmi, I'm trying to get it right at Me and You, but it's hard, is, like sort of year 5 to year 10, I went through periods of, depression at Dimmi because I was a sole founder, and it's hard. Nobody truly understands what you go through. Nobody's going through the pain and the heartache of about to run out of money, global competitors coming, losing great people, all of the shit that keeps you up, where you just can't sleep. And, so, you're working long hours, you're not paying yourself any money, and that just goes on and on and on. So, I truly believe that you've got to find balance. And, I didn't find that at Dimmi. So, so that resulted in me going through, a couple of years of depression and, a very tough period. And, it was because I was so obsessed. I felt I had an obligation to make this Dimmi thing work because I truly believed that the industry needed what we're doing. So I think the key things that I've learned, and I've tried to apply them to my time at Me and You, is you've got to have an out. So for me, my out is yoga and meditation, more yoga than meditation. But, me and my mat is absolutely one of the core, tenets of my new ride. And, my partner, Lisa, who's also a crazy entrepreneur, she holds me accountable. The last 2 weeks of my Me and You ride have probably been the 2 craziest weeks of my career. But, she's holding me to account. She's making sure I do my yoga, making sure I'm eating properly, the basic things in life, and making sure we're not stopping to appreciate the magic of what we're trying to do. So, so I'd say, obsess over it, be passionate about it, but just make sure you've got a couple of tools and tricks that allow you to stop and rejuvenate. Whether that's one long weekend away once a month, whether that's yoga or sport or socializing, whatever it is, find your out that works for you and stick to it.
Stevan, what's been easier this time around, and what have you found more difficult?
I think people think that as a second time round founder, it's easy. And without question, it's easier to attract top talent. It's easier to, to get an idea off the ground. It's easier to, attract investors. But I think the bit that is absolutely a lot harder is the first one is an accident. Like you don't know what you're doing. So any win you have is a great win. And, if you survive a week or a month or a year, it's probably a week or a month or a year more, more than you thought you were going to survive. So everything's a bonus. I think when you're in your number 2 or number 3, whatever that may be, you take that bar and you pull that bar up here. And I think the lens and the expectations that you put on yourself are materially higher. So I think it's easier in terms of attracting people, great people. It's easier to raise capital. It's easier to, open doors. But the bar that you set for yourself and the expectations that you have on yourself are materially different to anything that you did in your first iteration.
Thanks. So, last sort of question or two before we throw over to our audience, and I've got a number of questions for you. If you're in government planning for economic recovery, what would be the one policy change or the one lever you'd look to pull that you believe would help Australian startups? And small business.
Yeah. I think the small business one is easy, right? And I'm just somebody who's deeply passionate about the mums and dads who run cafes, restaurants, and pubs across this country. So that industry, like most small businesses, we need rent concessions, we need JobKeeper, and we need that to last longer than just lasting until September. So I think, that's kind of, that challenge on that side. I think for startups, I think we need to attract great people. And one great way to attract great people is through equity. So I think the more that the government can do to allow us to get government funding, government rebates, all great, attractive, easy equity and ESOP programs to help us attract great talent from locally and from globally, I think would go a long way to helping Aussie success stories. But I do think over and beyond that, I do think the single most important thing that Aussie startups need is we need other successful Aussie startups. So when we see the likes of Afterpay, Atlassian, Canva, it just inspires the rest of us. And it more than anything else, it says, you know what, we can do this. Aussie startup, the guy in the garage sitting at home, or the girl sort of, sitting on the couch, her and a laptop. We can do this. So I think we need more inspiration and more examples of success stories that will kind of keep us going in times of adversity and periods of great self-doubt.
Thank you very much. Well, look, our audience have submitted a few questions that we'd like to pose to you. So, how much does competition influence your business plans and strategies?
I'd say very little. Like I think you need to be very careful that you continue to watch what's happening around you, and therefore you pivot and evolve and change, and then lose who you are. So I'd say me and you, we're laser focused on who we are, the vision, the mission, the journey that we're on, right? Like we've got a 20-25 year plan. So it's not a detailed plan, but it's kind of a big vision of where we want to go. So that keeps us, what we call radar locked on where we're trying to go. You've got to be aware of the competitors. You've got to be aware of what the guy down the road's doing. But honestly, it's 0.5% of your thinking. Any more than that, you've got to be careful that you're not distracted and consumed by a lot of noise.
Thanks. Your next question. How do you track success? What are the key milestones that you like to track?
It's funny because when you introduced me, you said, Aussie success story or something like that. And it's funny, like that's definitely not how I feel or how I look at what I've done with Dimmi or with me and you. So success for me is very simple. It's got nothing to do with an exit or creating a household brand. It's, did you do something that has made a dent on the planet and made people's lives easier or better? And, without question, the only reason why I'm back in startup mode is because I obsess over that. I want to do something that makes this planet a bit better. So for me, that's a definition of success. Is did I and the people that were on the bus with me, did we make a dent in the planet that made an industry or a country or a planet a little bit better in some way? And me and you is very early in our life, but I truly think that if we do half of what we're capable of, we can help the hospitality industry rewrite its future and become a materially better industry and a better experience for everyone within it.
Thanks, Nate. Faster beers is a good way to start that. How do you use data analytics to better understand your target customers? Is it a big part of your current model at Me and You?
I'd say we use data insights excessively on tracking customers' behavior, conversion funnels, what they're doing in the app, what they're not doing in the app, sort of different behaviors across sort of iOS and Google and different platforms. In terms of sort of different segments, so, I think the interesting one for us is that, one of the beautiful opportunities with this business is it can go so broad. So, we monitor closely the different engagement that customers have with me and you in cafes versus restaurants versus pubs versus other opportunities. And then we kind of use that data to say, you know what, this is where we've got the best product market fit. This is where this business, should be focused, and this is where we need to invest all of our efforts and energies.
Thanks. What are the things you look for when selecting people who will be on your bus and that you'd like to bring onto the team?
Yeah, I think this evolves with time, and I think had you asked me that a couple of years ago, I was all about a CV and the technical skill set of people. I think, for me, the most important thing that I look for in people now is, are we aligned around the vision? Do I like this person? Can I see them on the bus contributing to the ride and to the journey? And, at the end of the day, is it somebody you could see yourself having a beer with? And I think, if you tick some of those boxes, then typically some of the other stuff, they may not be the best, but they can get there if they've got the right attitude. And, I think at the end of the day, especially in startup, you need people who are willing to go the extra mile, who are willing to do whatever it takes to help the vision come alive. So, for me, that's heart and soul and attitude more than anything else.
Thanks. Probably just a follow on to that one was we spoke a little bit earlier about, I suppose, making sure that you had those right people that were connected to you, but also just finding people and talent. How have you found the Australian market to find, whether it be your engineers, your devs, your account managers and the like?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I'd say is that, I think as founders, our job is, to set a vision, but more than anything else, I think, we're talent, we should be obsessed over talent all the time. So creating a great culture and finding great people, to come on the ride. So I'd say that there's not a moment that goes past, whether it's at a supermarket when I'm checking out, or a meeting that I had earlier today, in North Sydney, where I'm not looking about whether this person would be a great person for the me and you ride. So I know that, in a meeting that I had earlier today, that I met somebody who I would absolutely love because, she was brilliant and passionate and smart and had humor that, I would love for her to be on the bus. So I think we're always on the lookout. We're always recruiting, and it's in the weirdest of locations and spots that we will find great people. I think the engineering bit, I do absolutely agree that finding great engineers in Australia is difficult. But I truly believe that if you've got a problem that is big and bold, you can always find great people. So, the fact that we've got a problem that people want to solve, the fact that we've got an exceptional CPO who's leading that team, and then in that team, I've got some of the best devs and engineers in this country. Talent attracts talent. Right? So people want to be in that environment, and they want to be challenged, and they want to be creating something that, 20 years from today, they're going to tell their kids about. So I think, that's my job, is to kind of start to create the framework of that, create a problem that people want to solve. And I think if you do that, finding great people becomes a whole lot easier.
Thank you. How can you ensure your company remains independent after a new venture or capital is brought on?
Yeah, well, I think I made this mistake in the past. At Dimmi, Telstra, and Village Roadshow came on board as investors, sort of maybe 5 or 6 years in, and we lost the startup when that happened, because I suddenly had two very big businesses who didn't really understand small business, sort of sitting at the table, at the board meetings and as investors. So everything took a bit longer, and a bit more risk adverse, a bit less innovative, and more paperwork and more hoops you need to go through. And sometimes that's good. Most times, it's a way of sort of disconnecting you from, your customer and, kind of the speed and agility that makes startups great in the first place. So I think, the single most important thing, it doesn't matter if it's a small business or a big business or, just a high net worth person. Maintaining your independence means you've found people who have similar visions and values as you. And if speed matters, and if that's important to you, you've got to find investors who believe in that. If you're obsessed over an exit, you've got to find investors who want an exit. So I think the most important thing is finding investors, big, small, or otherwise, and board members who have an aligned set of values and a aligned vision with you. Otherwise, if you don't, it can become pretty toxic pretty quickly.
Thanks a lot, Stevan. Do you think there should be government regulations around preventing hostile takeovers, particularly by overseas countries or organisations, of Australian startups?
I don't really have an informed view on that. So is there a skip button?
It certainly is. So look, that's okay. How important is your industry experience before you work on your own startup in IT? And I think you've sort of answered this, but if there are any budding entrepreneurs,
I had a lot of hotel experience. I had zero hospitality experience. The only hospitality experience that I had was, as a kid growing up, and this is the Italian in me, grew up around the Italian sort of big fat Italian lunch every Sunday, where it was food and laughter and tears and arguments and food and wine, right? So my obsession for this industry was born out of a childhood memories that from my very early years. Many years later, my parents made the mistake of getting into a restaurant in the northern beaches of Sydney, and I saw what they went through, as two small business owners trying to run a restaurant, which is it's near on impossible, and very, very, very difficult to crazy hours, making no money, huge stress, just insane sets of challenges. So I think it was those two bits combined that then led me many years later to think, what, I love this industry. Some of the best moments in life happen when you're breaking bread with family and friends around a table. I want to use tech to make that industry that I'm passionate about a bit better. So that's where Dimmi was born, and ultimately that's when me and you was born. It comes from the same place.
Thank you very much for sharing your stories with our viewers and our members this evening. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening for our second interview on our Industry Insights Leaders series with Stevan. That'll be back next Thursday. Please register for our next session.
Daniel, can I say one thing before you go?
Of course you can.
Mate, there is a lot of people out there who've got an exceptional idea. They're probably working a day job in a big corporate, but they've got this idea and they doubt themselves because, they just don't know where to start, and, they don't have the self-confidence to give it a go. The only thing I would say to those people is, if you truly believe in it, if you truly believe in what you're doing and, in the idea that you have, and that you're not doing it for monetary reasons, you're not doing it for fame or fortune or anything else, because those things are not real. If you're doing it because you believe in the idea and you believe in that can make a dent in the planet, I would strongly encourage all of your audience to give it a crack, and you're never going to regret giving it a go. But the corporate path will always be there if you want it. Don't be scared to give startup and entrepreneurial ride a go. It'll be a roller coaster of a roller coaster ride of a lifetime, and definitely one that you'll tell your kids about many years from today.
Thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt, mate.
No, that's okay. We're grateful for your time and for your insights. So please register via our website for our next session next Thursday. We will be featuring Matt Pancino, former CTO of CBA. Thank you once again for joining us, and again, thanks, Stevan, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Cheers, buddy.